Hello, everybody. My name is Vito Quaglia, and this is A Matter of Principle. Our guest today is Chris Finan, who is the President and Chief Revenue Officer of Anitian, cybersecurity firm out on the West Coast. And Chris is someone who I haven't spoken to, since the 90s. He was a student out at Delaware Valley High School when I was a teacher there back in the good old days. And after he left DV, when he graduated in 96, I believe, he went to the Air Force, graduated, and just went to a career in the service, did his time where he served, was involved in, after that, I believe he served 7 years, and then got into some work with the Department of Defense, was involved in some government work, in DC for a while, left there and went into the private sector where he got really involved in cybersecurity, and a lot of things that are way above my intelligence level and my pay grade. I kidded around and wanted to know if I needed any national security clearance in discussing things with him because of some of the things he had done in his past career. But we're all good to go. I didn't get anybody to come on and tell us we couldn't promote this episode, so I think we're free. But without further ado from me, I'm going to just ask Chris to, first of all, I'm going to welcome Chris to the show. Welcome, Chris.
Hey, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
No, thank you. And I just have, Chris, if you could just tell the listeners a little bit about your journey, and, maybe right from, when you left high school, you went to the Air Force, and how your journey kind of went from there.
Yeah, happy to. So I left DV, left Northeast PA, and headed out to the Air Force Academy. I spent 4 years there and graduated, became a commissioned officer in the Air Force, and went to pilot training. They taught me how to fly jets. I got my wings. I flew airplanes in the Air Force for a few years, and then had an opportunity to go and work in the intelligence field as an intelligence officer. I got to do that for a few years, and was really interesting. I had studied Arabic at the academy and got to put that language to use in, a couple of assignments in the Middle East, in Iraq, working with the Army. So it was a really interesting career. Definitely not what I had expected signing up to go be a pilot, but, found myself in a lot of really interesting areas, just trying to make an impact for the better. And then after that decided, hey, let me go and do something a little closer to home. So I got out of the Air Force. I moved to DC, and I got a job working on the Secretary of Defense's staff. And, I had spent my career up to that point really doing sort of counterterrorism missions. And the first day on the job, they said, we hired you to do this counterterrorism job, but actually what we really need is somebody to, stand up U.S. Cyber Command and work on cybersecurity. And I hadn't probably done much with computers since Delaware Valley, since, computer science classes there. I had done a lot with it early on. And so I said, okay, let's see what this is all about. And 15 years later, that's really where I've focused. I had an opportunity to work in the White House doing cybersecurity, focusing on cybersecurity policies to help improve the protection of the country's critical infrastructure, the electrical grid, water treatment plants, making sure that they're secured against, hackers from overseas trying to break into those systems. And then had some opportunities from there to go out to the West Coast of Silicon Valley, which is where I am now, and build these products from scratch. And that's really what I've been doing the last almost 12 years. I've had 5 different companies now that I've started or joined and helped scale, all in the cybersecurity space. So it's kind of become my focus area, but I'd say more and more in the last few in particular, it's been more about leading the companies, helping, build them up and make them more successful businesses. So I'm much more on the business side of things these days than into the weeds on cybersecurity. But stepping back, despite that career that's sort of gone all over the place, I'd say the one through line that I've had has been just an interest in problems, and I'd say a mission focus of, hey, what can I do that's meaningful to me? And so that's really taken me across all these different areas in the world, and also in terms of the American economy, these different problem areas. But, for me, I think what's been meaningful most about it has been that mission focus. And so that's why I enjoy working at these relatively small companies, between 10 and 100 people, building these teams and building the culture of the company to be focused on solving this problem.
Well, I mean, you're a humble dude because, I mean, the stuff you describe in your career, your journey so far in the professional world, from your days in the Air Force Academy and so on. I mean, it's almost stuff like you could write a movie about some of the things you've been involved in. I mean, you've had a firsthand look at some really crazy situations. I mean, really intense situations where anything involving, Department of Defense and a lot of the, the stuff going on in the Middle East has to be intense. And, you're dealing with a lot of really heavy situations. And I'm sure having a front row seat to what happens in DC, outsiders like me can only imagine what, we see things on CNN and news and things like that and what we read online. But to be somebody who worked there, that must have been, amazingly interesting to say the least. And then you're on the forefront of all the cybersecurity, which is I would say one of the number one worries for me, for our generation going on right now is because, you hear every day in schools, we hear about different school districts where their information system just got locked down because somebody hacked into it and is demanding a ransom for this. So there goes, you talk about the ability to just have grades or, running a school district. Never mind, you're talking about, protecting water treatment facilities and electrical grids, on a much bigger scale. But that's the kind of stuff that worries people and keeps people awake at night now. So you've kind of been in and around danger, maybe not a gun right in your face, but in and around a lot of dangerous situations so far in your career. It's got to be, you must have a lot of great stories. Hopefully we could peel back a couple layers here and you can tell us some good ones.
That sounds like fun. Yeah. Look, I think you go where the mission takes you. And I think I was fortunate in having a great foundation, a great jumping off point. And, so much of it I think is timing, but I'm a believer in, luck is where preparation meets opportunity. If you're preparing, if you're doing the work, you're going to get those opportunities and hopefully they're interesting and hopefully you pick the right ones for the right reason. And then you ride it and you see where that goes. And, sometimes it takes you into a war zone where, with the Army where you never thought you'd be, but it's, it was very meaningful. And I look back and I think I carry with me a lot of good lessons, good and bad, from those experiences. And I think I'm still to some extent drawn to, to the action. I want to be working on problems that matter, and that, I definitely like problems where you've got an adversary who is trying to, get at something or disrupt. And for me, that's probably one of the more meaningful elements of cybersecurity is we're in a constant cat and mouse game with, adversaries of the country, criminal groups who, are trying to get ransoms from school districts or hospitals. And, I like the mission of trying to help the underdog, right? Trying to help these organizations that, probably aren't ready to be attacked and maybe don't have the resources to withstand an attack like that. So that part's been great. I gotta say, I don't like it when people get attacked. I like it when we can prevent those things from happening, but I do enjoy the sort of, combat element of it, or the adversarial aspect of it.
Now your mom and dad were, my bosses when I taught at Delaware Valley. Like I said, back in the day, I believe your mom was the assistant super when I was hired. Your dad was the high school principal. And one of the things that always impressed me about them, Dr. Candace and Dr. Tom Finan, that when they recruited people to come on board up there at the time that I got there in the early 90s, Delaware Valley was really growing. It was going from a smaller school district to a very, very large one, with so much, the population explosion that happened up there in Pike County. And it seemed like, your mom and dad and the administrative team at the time really was looking for a certain kind of person when they were recruiting, their staff to come on board. And so many of the people that came in when I did, if they're not still there being successful leaders, they left to be leaders in other places. And growing up in and around the district, as a student, but naturally, in your home as well, were there certain things like that were in the, like, were they mom and dad with the same kind of goals? I would imagine so. There has to be some of that spillover in how they were professionally and how they were, in the household, because you talk about mission oriented and goals, and, just the way you're describing how you carry about your own life. What were some of the ingredients that you saw growing up with, parents that were professionally the way I see them, but what were they like as parents?
Oh, they were terrific parents, very, very supportive. And, I was really lucky to have just a great supportive home and, lots of opportunities as a kid. And I think, also it wasn't just the way that they supported me and my sister growing up, but I think to be part of that community and, to be so integrated into that school and, in that area, the school was a big part of the community. A lot of the community centered around that institution. And I think something that I've appreciated as I've had the benefit of time being able to reflect was the unique culture of that institution that I think, you get by making the right hires and creating the right environment of people who are, motivated and inspired toward a vision. In that case, it was a vision to build something great for kids of people who really wanted to do that and were doing it for the right reasons. And I think one of the lessons that I reflect on even still today was the amount of time that they spent thinking about hiring great people and thinking about and talking about building a great culture. That was something that, they would talk shop at home and, in the car or whatever. And I remember as a little kid kind of hearing that and probably not caring much at the time. But I think, deep down, I sort of reflect back now and can remember how much time they focused on that. And I think, I was one of the kids who reaped the benefits of that out of that institution, along with a lot of my cohort who I still, have kept in touch with and see doing well. And I think we recognized that was a unique institution. I think I visited not too long ago, and it still seems like it's really thriving. But yeah, I do think that was part of their focus, dedication. I think it was really intentional. And the way that they channeled that was by going out, spending a lot of time trying to attract the right kind of talent to come in and join that culture and enrich it and, drive it forward. So I definitely felt lucky to be part of it. And then also to have that extra element where I was able to observe, the cooks right in the kitchen who were helping with others to build that.
And you talked about when you were talking about your, the steps in your career so far, and you talked about that cat and mouse game, the adversarial combat, of trying to figure out things and solve problems. Now you had that from, the time when I knew you, back in school, you were an athlete, you were involved in different teams, you're involved, and I think you're a mock trial guy as well. So you're always involved in that kind of, back and forth, that conflict debate kind of thing. And were there things that I'm sure that there's, way more that you learned in the Air Force and in your military service and then getting thrown into, really crazy situations. But are there things from that foundation of your education that, you drew on when you're serving and when you were, involved in whether it was stuff in DC or in starting these companies? Are there any lessons that you could kind of, lean on from your early days in school, or the things that you're dealing with now really things that came on like in your college years and beyond?
I definitely think that foundation was built early, and there's a lot of things that have stood out to me as I've reflected. I definitely, think back on a lot of great teachers who went out of their way, to help, giving you the tools, right, to, as a kid to get better. Definitely, just the social element of school and, learning how to build relationships, learning how to deal with conflict, right? And then I think, on the athletic fields, that era at DV and in the football program was really tough. I mean, we didn't win many games, and it was physically demanding. It was mentally demanding. It was It was a challenge. It was, a lot of adversity. And I remember that again, when I think back about that experience, and especially as I progressed through that program of having to deal with that adversity week over week and, keep people together, keep sort of a positive attitude through it. That, I think helped build a lot of resiliency that I definitely drew on later. After that, basic training was a breeze. It was like there wasn't a lot that I encountered after that in terms of, especially when it came to physical challenges that I just felt were beyond me, I was like an average athlete probably, but I just felt like I knew I had the confidence that I could bear down and just through grit and determination could get through anything because of a lot of that, I think. And
Yeah,
I definitely, I definitely appreciated that experience and still often think about it.
well, that's something I probably didn't want to bury the lead there, but yeah, you were there right at the beginning when, Delaware Valley started a high school football program from scratch. I mean, you were right at the infancy of it. So yeah, and I think when I got there, I came up in the second year, when I first started teaching. I think it might have been the second year of varsity football. So again, the bare bones, the Spartan times. I mean, the field was a field. There were no real bleachers that were built in there. There was no stadium yet. It was, the most Spartan of times. And I think, and you kind of led into it, but is that maybe one of the reasons why, you kind of were attracted to the choices you've made so far in your career? I mean, the challenge of military service, the challenge of, working in the Department of Defense, the challenge of starting companies, from the ground up, things like that. Like you saw that with all that kind of, adversity that you talk about. Do you think maybe that was like baked into your DNA and that's kind of why you've been doing the kind of things you've been doing?
Yeah, maybe I'm a glutton for punishment.
Yeah.
I think I like hard problems, and I think increasingly, again, as you go through and you build confidence and you build a toolkit, which, starts with a lot of resiliency and just willingness to bear down and persist.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, again, once you've experienced that, once you've learned that as a person, especially as a young person, I think that that's a really incredibly valuable tool that you have and you can fall back on because like, hey, look, adversity is going to happen. It's inevitable. And it's what you do in that, can you persist through it and get to the other side of the problem? I do think, yeah, there's probably some truth to that. My wife thinks I'm nuts about doing these startups, but I like them because they are hard problems without easy solutions. And, I enjoy that aspect of it. I probably do. And, there probably is an element of having done so much of that early on, but it is a labor of love for me, I'd say.
Well, now let's go back a few years, 15, 20 years, 30 years. And when you're involved in, military service, that right then and there is going to set you apart from other folks. But then, and we all, everybody has seen movies and understand or think what that is like, going through basic training, going through all the things that you're being tested constantly, your will to push through. But then once you get through that, and, you go through your years of active duty and then you're working within, the Defense Department like you were, what's that world like? You're in, corporate, cybersecurity things right now. Are the business world and the governmental, / defense mode world, are they similar? Are there vast differences when you're working in DC doing that kind of stuff versus trying to, sell things to clients like you are now? What are the differences and the similarities really?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah. DC it's very process oriented, right? Things really revolve around the system that starts with Congress. Congress appropriates, funds. The agencies sort of set the requirements based on the mission of the agency. And then, you execute with the resources that you're given, and you just sort of adapt that strategy. But it's very focused on a specific problem set, in the Defense Department. That's quite broad. And that was the one that I was familiar with. I think I was probably a little unique because I came in as a political appointee, which is a little bit rare, and it's just happened to work out that way. But I had combat experience. I'd had military experience, having served, which wasn't the case for a lot of other political appointees. Some, but maybe not all. And so, I think I had brought, as a result of that, maybe a unique perspective, having just recently served in, a conflict that we were very much still involved in at the time, the war in Iraq, and being really familiar with it, and, having some very strong opinions and, emotional feelings about that conflict. It was interesting to be on the other side of it, to be on the sort of, policy making side, where things seem very clean, right? They can seem very black and white. And, if you don't have that ground truth experience, I think they can seem overly simple. So I always felt it was a privilege to be in that role. And that, one of the things that I could bring to that role was, a depth of perspective that was based on, the experiences that I had lived over the last few years in that region and dealing with those problems. So it was really meaningful to be able to bring that additional dimension to the problem and, hopefully help, drive more thoughtful policies and execution. So, but yeah, DC was unique. And, there's a political element to it, right? There's a budget element to it. There's, the geopolitics of everything that's happening in the world. So I did really enjoy it. It was great. I was in my, early 30s, and it feels like, you're in Rome, and this is the Roman Empire, right? And it's where everything is happening. So there were like 3 or 4 years where I just felt like it was kind of the center of everything geopolitically. And it was fun to be involved in a lot of that.
And then when did you say, okay, I want to take a left turn and I want to go here? How did that, you wanted a different challenge? You're kind of, okay, I did my bit here and now I want something completely different. Or did you know somebody who was, in that field, cause you went literally across the country from where you were to where you are now. How did you, come up with that change?
Well, as I said, it was really a mission focus. I had worked on the Secretary of Defense's staff, and then I had gotten reassigned, pulled over to the White House, to the National Security Council, and given a problem to go solve. And the problem was that, the nation's intelligence and military leaders were starting to get concerned about cyber attacks and that weapon, cyber weapons being turned on American critical infrastructure. And, we see that borne out today. This is in the 2010, 2011, 2012 timeframe. And so we wanted to get ahead of that problem. The thing that was constraining us, holding us back, was that the laws, the legal frameworks were all based on the telephone era, mm-hmm. right? They weren't based on the internet era. They were written in the 30s. And so we had to update a lot of these laws to be able to, have the tools and the authorities for the government to get ahead of this threat. And that was the problem that the president gave me to go solve. And here I am, kind of at a young age and trying to figure out how to do this. And, that required convincing Congress to change the laws, and I ran just head into a buzzsaw of special interests and worked to, build a coalition around the problem. And I can't remember, I think we did like 50 different congressional hearings and meetings, and I had, all the generals in there. It was great because I had like the complete disposal of the federal government I could bring to bear on the problem. And after working on that for about 2 years, we finally got it to a vote, and it failed to pass the Congress. And, that was just heartbreaking because I just felt like the threat picture is so clear of what's going to happen, and yet we can't muster the will to work together to solve it and overcome the special interests that are, holding back the country and want to keep this status quo in place. So I will say I got a little jaded, and I realized that, maybe the best way to affect that problem was to start working more on the technology, because, policy always lags the tech problem. This is inherently a technology problem. And I felt, hey, where's the best place to go do this? The first place I went was DARPA. I went to the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency for a year after the White House and got to build some really cool that's the, agency that built the internet. They built stealth aircraft. They build all these new really cool things. And so I got to do some really cool projects building like new cyber warfare tools there for a year. But in that process, I got to work with a lot of Silicon Valley companies, and I felt like, hey, this is the front line of this problem. If I want to really go work with the people who are innovating and are doing so, unencumbered by the special interest, by the political winds holding us back, that's the place to go. You can move fast, you can break things, you can really get to the cutting edge. And so that appealed to me. It was not easy to move across the country. I think my family was really happy that I had, was finally within driving distance of home for the first time in 10 or 15 years. And, here I am and I say, hey, I'm going to move across the country again. So that wasn't an easy part of it, but I was really drawn to the idea of going and working on the front line of this problem and being able to do so at really agile and innovative speed. So for me, it was a little bit of a leap to take. I had to, transition out of the government into the private sector, going into these really small companies, trying to figure out how to make them work and how to sell things for the first time. But it was also a really fun challenge and, fun to take that risk. And I was still single at the time, and, I didn't have kids. So it was a good time for me and I felt that it was very intentional. I felt like, hey, this is a time in my life where I can make this leap. So, why not?
Well, and folks, we are listening to another episode of Matter of Principle, and our guest, Chris Finan, a cybersecurity expert, and I'm starting to think is really Tony Stark, because I think some of the things you're in my head, that's all I'm thinking of. I'm talking to like Iron Man. Like I'm talking to somebody who's involved in all these companies who are, at the front line of cybersecurity and global conflict. And, here's a kid that I had in the classroom in the 90s. So are you in fact, our new Iron Man? Are you involved in things like that, Chris? Is that what this is really about?
Oh, I wish that were true. That'd be way more fun. But, unfortunately, most of my job today is paperwork and not doing as much of the cool stuff.
Listen,
really miss flying fighter jets for a living.
Sure.
But I'll say this is, in my late 40s, it's still fun. I still dig it. It's a fun career, and I'm really happy to do it. It does give me a lot of energy.
Well, and the thing, like you mentioned, that you've been involved in several of these, smaller companies, starting them up, getting them, jumping into something that's started already or really growing it yourself. So what do you look for? So if you talk us through something like that. So you're with, the first company A, and you're kind of like, how do you realize, all right, well, I've done what I need to do here and I want to find another challenge? Like how does that work?
Well, usually you come in and your focus is on solving a particular problem. And, for me, it's always been, hey, how do I get this thing started from scratch, a new build, and get it up to the point of viability or, to some sale, and more recently, I'm become kind of more of a turnaround specialist where the investors will bring me in if there's a company that's, stalled, maybe they've had some management challenges and they need to fix it. And so my last few have definitely been more of that profile. And I'll say I enjoy building from scratch because I can really put my imprint on things, and, I'm not having to fix other people's mistakes. Although I'll say from a leadership standpoint, I've probably, and maybe because I am a glutton for punishment, I do enjoy the turnarounds because it's a harder problem. And I think it just is a harder leadership problem in particular.
What do you see and because you've done such a varied, amount of experiences, all similar in some vein, but, really different in a lot of other ways. But what do you see if I ask you for the top three ingredients, in a leader that, is effective in their area, whether it's, something that you saw in the military service, something you saw in DC, something you see in the companies you're working with now. What would be the top three characteristics, the top three ingredients any really effective kind of leader has?
I think for me, that would be, it starts with extreme ownership of the problem and accountability. I think the best leaders that I've observed and learned from have always fitted that, the buck stops here. So I think that is probably one of the most important things. I think the second piece for me that comes very quickly after that is actually caring about people. I think there's a certain degree of empathy that you have to have as a leader to be really effective in thinking about the needs of the people who you need to cultivate to A, create a great performance culture, but B, really solve those hard problems. And then I think three, there's particularly in business, I look for a commitment to winning. Do they have, are they willing to hustle? Are they willing to really do what it takes? Do they have the grit, especially in little startup companies? I look for that too, because I think that's what makes a great team. So I looked and try to cultivate those things. And I think about leadership, not just coming from the top, but, being ingrained throughout the culture of the organization and really trying to build it, cultivate it, inspire it at sort of each layer of the organization and ultimately really empower people to make decisions. I always think like my job as a leader is to empower the leaders in the organization to operate, right, to have the resources they need, to have the clarity of strategy and vision, and then to get the hell out of their way, and let them solve the problem because they're going to be way more effective. They're going to involve, their teams more. And the last thing that they need is me looking over their shoulder, right? I want to be there to help in a capacity to support, but I want to also stay out of their way and give them the room to grow and to learn and to operate. And so I think it's a combination of those three things that I always seek to cultivate in an organization. And it starts with ownership.
Excellent. Great points there. Now, in your world of cybersecurity, you definitely understand way more than, the common person that even thinks they understand, what's going out there on the internet and the dark web and everything else that's out there. But do you think that people in general, society, folks that just, get up, go to work, raise their family, whatnot, do you think they really understand the threats that are out there in cybersecurity? Or do you think there's a lot more that people don't get?
I mean, I think in the last few years, these things are becoming more real because a lot of folks have heard about, a local school or a local municipal organization that has gotten hacked, right? And been, been affected by ransomware where the systems are locked and, the doctors can't perform surgeries, right? Or they can't bill and, they're not able to maybe get paid by, reimbursed by their insurer. I think people now have experienced the impact of these cyber attacks, whether or not they connect those impacts to how it's happening may not always be the case. But I do believe that these things are now becoming more real for people because it's impacting their daily lives, or maybe they've had, their identity stolen. So I do think that there's a greater awareness now throughout society. I think we still have the sort of like NCIS version of it, right? That seems like really out there and probably like esoteric. This is not something that I have to worry about, right? It's like a sci-fi thing. But then I think you have the real impacts to people's lives and like the local economy that they probably have experienced in some, first or second degree way. And I don't know that that connection's always made, but I think there's more and more awareness, at least of these things actually impacting society and being something that we have to worry about. Certainly more so than, when I first started working on it 10 years ago. I think we have a lot more awareness. Unfortunately, that's because, school districts and hospitals all across the country, and very often in smaller rural communities that don't have the wherewithal to invest in cyber defenses, are the ones getting impacted. So unfortunately, I do think there's a growing awareness, but that's because, we're not ahead of the problem the way that we wanted to be.
It's more reactionary than trying to be preventative. Yeah. And I was just, as you were talking, I was thinking of, just from my, my view, my lens that I'm looking through, school districts, more and more, probably since, the time you were in school, when you had so many different, physical threats that came into the school districts that weren't there, when I was in school, and so you had to really kind of harden the district itself, where, we talked about the SRO officers in schools, and you talked about metal detectors, and, more and more cameras, the video surveillance systems, all of that. So that figures into budgets now of not just schools, but any place. Malls have had, mass shootings, and every place where people can congregate has to figure out a way to harden those places and to have surveillance around it. And now, another layer is the cybersecurity part of it. Anybody who has an information system is susceptible to some type of attack. And so again, it's something that's necessary, unfortunately, but then it's also like a financial burden, for lack of a better word, because that costs money, right? Whether you contract out somebody that's, the big brother for you, or you're buying a product that does it, and, however that works. But what do you think is what's going on right now? Is it a situation where, the things that your people, your companies provide, are they, is it something that's getting more and more affordable for places? Like, is this stuff that you see people making choices? Well, that would be important to have, but, our funds or our funding sources, don't have that right now. So we're going to put it off for 6 months to a year. And then unfortunately, things happen. Or is this something where everyone's just jumping on board regardless of the cost? Like, is it, does anybody listen to what's going on and say, okay, that sounds great, but we can't afford that right now? Or is this something everyone's really doing regardless?
Yeah, this is a great question. I'll say my last company, X0, this was our core thesis, which was, could we, bend the cost curve down for exceptional cybersecurity and, bring it to a broader market, but in particular, the smaller organizations, small businesses, medium-sized businesses, hospitals, school districts that, don't have the wherewithal to, build great cybersecurity programs. Can we bring this sort of, outsourced version of this in and deliver it at lower cost and complexity? That was our core thesis. And I'll say that, and I worked on that for about 3 years of my life. And I'll say we had mixed success, quite honestly. I think that we never really, the thesis, I'd say, was partially successful or proven. And, I think in part because the bad guys, they make a lot of money, and they forward invest that in artificial intelligence and, new capabilities that defeat the defenders. And so it's tough to keep costs down, because these criminal organizations that are, attacking these institutions are incredibly well funded because of how effective they are at getting ransoms out of businesses and hospitals and schools. And they take that money and then they invest it in new attack techniques that can thwart the best defenses. And so the attackers have a big advantage in this space, unfortunately. And you're always sort of playing catch up. Like you said, it's very reactive today as a result of that. So the costs are rising, unfortunately, because the attacks are getting more and more sophisticated. And, we try to be creative. We try to look for ways of keeping those costs low, but, it is unfortunately becoming the cost of doing business, because of these criminal attackers are just really effective at what they do. It's a really lucrative business. you're a criminal organization these days, this is the business model that you go into, because there's very little accountability. You can sit in, Eastern Europe or Russia or Southeast Asia, and, the American government can't really touch you. Your home government probably welcomes it, or at least turns a blind eye to it, because, you're bringing in a lot of money and you're creating a lot of jobs. And it's a really effective business model, unfortunately. And, our small businesses, our schools and our hospitals are on the losing end of that business model today. So I don't know. We haven't cracked that nut yet, but it is a mission that still focused on. And I think with tech improvements, we can make it more cost effective, but we still have a lot of work to do.
Well, and like you said, with, the criminal enterprises that are involved in this kind of stuff, it's really, organized crime, of 22nd century, 21st century, rather than, the mafia or, the Black Hand and, things that happened, 100 years ago where people were getting extorted and blackmailed and, paying protection. They're doing it this way through all the digital, venues and ways that people are vulnerable. How many, like, if you had to, maybe this is a question you don't even know the answer to, but most of the stuff that happens out there, is it these large criminal enterprises doing it, or are there like these one or two guys in a basement somewhere doing stuff, or is that stuff that, smaller groups attack people which is trying to fish for identity theft kind of thing, and bigger organizations go after corporations? Any idea how that works?
Yeah, it's something that I've studied a lot. Again, it's interesting. And if you're trying to build a new company or a new product in cybersecurity, one of the things that you do is you study the attackers. You learn, hey, where are they going? And then you figure out, okay, well, here's the next business I need to build, right? Or the next product. And so, yeah, I definitely focus a lot on those. I think there was a really interesting inflection point that happened in the, mid tens, right? Like the 2014, 2015, 2016, when cryptocurrencies really took off. And what that enabled was horizontal models where you'd have, instead of like large criminal syndicates that were, fully verticalized, right? Where you'd have the people were building the attack kits, and then there were people launching them, and there were people doing the ransom. Now all of that is sort of farmed out to specialist groups, because cryptocurrencies allow for a means of secure payment and non-traceable payment in many cases across these different specialist groups. And so you'll have, you might have a group in Hungary that specializes in stealing passwords, right? Or tricking people over the phone to give up their passwords. And then they'll sell that access to maybe another group in Russia who will then take it and will, implant a ransomware payload into that network. And then you might even have another group that's then the ones who are seeking to collect payment. And they're all sharing the proceeds, and so they all specialize in these different elements of the attack. And so that's one reason why, as this becomes more networked and distributed, it's very difficult to combat, because they're spread out across jurisdictions and around the world, and it's very difficult to trace these groups to their origin, and then it's very difficult to defeat them or to neutralize them in any meaningful way, because a new group will just spring up. And as you said earlier, there's a dark web marketplace where anybody can go in and can purchase these services. And so that it was what we call ransomware as a service. That ransomware as a service model, when that proliferated, it really began scaling up these attacks. And that's why in the late teens and 2020s, we've really seen these attacks now proliferate, because these organizations have really figured out how to scale these capabilities. And it's an entire economy that's really proliferated that enables it.
Wow,
so it's very difficult to defeat that, right?
I mean, it's like real James Bond kind of, like 2.0 stuff that you're dealing with. Like really, it's our reality right now. It's like these are the real threats that are out there. Now, the getting kids ready for post high school part of my brain was just thinking like, so the folks that go into this, on your side, the side of the good guys right now. Do you guys go and recruit like, the kids, the young kids who are hackers and get in trouble for trying to, do the things they do? Or do they make some of the best cybersecurity people because they know the ins and outs of what they were doing and they use that power for good? Is that stuff that you guys look for, or people out there, in your area look for things like that?
Yeah. They can't have broken the law.
No. Yeah.
Serious, but yeah, we do. And I'd say the interesting thing about, and maybe an element of that makes this unique, is that truly anyone can learn it, and there are a ton of resources, open source resources that are freely available where you can, if you have an interest in computers and learning this stuff, like you can go on YouTube, you can go on a lot of free sites and learn a lot of this, or with very little investment, you can go on something like Udemy and pick up a lot of these skills. And we do, I have hired a lot of people who have been, autodidacts, mostly self-taught and with like very little practical experience, but they've cultivated that skill. They've looked for opportunities, and, and often those people have just a driving intellectual curiosity that makes them really good at this. But one of the nice things about this is the barriers to entry, if you want to be a cybersecurity analyst, to get in on that first level are pretty low. Now we're seeing AI begin to, disrupt that initial entry point of cybersecurity, just because we can't hire enough people. There's always a skills shortage. But it is, when I talk to young people, if they're interested or if they're trying to figure out a way to get into the tech sector, I always encourage them to look at this, because there is a great path for people. If they like technology, this is a great way to get in. And, you just heard why, like, this career is not going away. The adversaries roll out new types of attacks, new types of tools every few months. And so there's always something new to learn, and there's always a way to make yourself more relevant, because unfortunately these attacks continue.
Yeah. So those kids out there that play around and try to get around the firewall to play video games instead of doing their work in class or whatever it is. If they have some of that interest, then they could actually, make a career out of trying to work around and actually work on the other side of, preventing people from working around that kind of stuff. So that's an interesting way to look at it. Now, you mentioned AI. Is AI something where, that could really, that's Pandora's box, where exponentially there could be more and more and more security threats, just because AI is going to get more and more intelligent. I know it's artificial intelligence, but there's going to be things that it learns and it's just going to unfold. Is that things that you guys worry about, like trying to stay ahead of what's coming next?
Yeah, we see it. It's a tool. It can be used by the defenders and the attackers, and I think it'll benefit both. But ultimately, cybersecurity is a human problem. At the end of the day, there's a person behind the computer, right? It's somebody's bank account that they're trying to get to. And the thing that really worries me, and I think we're already beginning to see, the criminalization of criminal use, I should say, of AI, is in just making much more realistic human impersonators. Whether that's, the bank calling you, right, and asking you for your PIN, or whether that's maybe a family member. And, so the use of deep fakes to trick people to, this, it's called social engineering, but this is the most common way that a hacker breaks into a system, is they trick a human being into giving them access or giving them a password or some secret. And, we see that happening today with the use of deep fakes to impersonate family members. Hey, it's your dad. Can you, transfer me some money to this account? I'm stuck on the side of the road and I really need your help. That is happening now already. And I think it's only scratching the surface of what's possible leveraging artificial intelligence. Now, we're also using AI to get better at detecting these things, but it's an arms race. And, the attackers, because they're so well funded and because their business depends on it, are almost always innovating and are staying ahead of the curve.
Now, I have to ask you this, Chris, as somebody, when in 1995 or four, or whatever it was back in the day when you were learning to run, 21 power and, on a rocky field with no lights out in the middle of, Pike County, nowhere, USA, did you think you'd ever be fighting cyber warfare? Did you anticipate that as a youngster? Like, how about this? This is definitely a wild and strange journey you've been on.
All I ever really wanted to do was fly airplanes for a living. And I was very fortunate that I was able to do that for a while. I didn't really have many ambitions beyond that. So no, I didn't necessarily envision this. Like Mike Tyson says, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face.
Mm-hmm.
I had a great plan until I couldn't fly fighter jets anymore. And, I then had to go and figure out plan B. And it's been a journey. But, and I don't know that I would have ever expected this, but I think that's part of the fun, right? Is you take the pitches that are thrown at you and you do what you can with them and, try to put them in play and see if you can score a run or two. So, that again, for me, it's been about that mission through line. Where can I go to make a difference and to do something that I think is a really interesting problem that I want to go solve because it's going to help somebody. And it's interesting where those things can take you. I would have never, ever expected this journey, which seems, when I look back, seems crazy and very roundabout, but somehow, at least today, it kind of makes sense to me.
Now, flying fighter jets, number one, how much of a rush is that? I mean, like, can you explain that to someone who's never been in one? Like, what is that like?
If you like roller coasters, that's the career for you. I just always loved flying and really wanted to do it. One of the things that I loved about flying fighters is I didn't get to do it very long, unfortunately. I was still very much a newbie, learning the ropes when I couldn't do it anymore. But one of the things that I love flying airplanes. The reason I'm not an airline pilot is, and many of my good friends from the Air Force and the Academy are doing that. They're phenomenal. They love it. They love what they do. It wasn't for me because I wanted to be working on a hard problem. And, one of the things that I liked about flying fighter jets was you weren't just flying the airplane. That was step one. You were flying the airplane to do something with it, to go drop a bomb or to go and, try to shoot down another aircraft. And you had to be really good at that. You had to become really well versed and a master of those operational arts of, dogfighting, of, surface attack, dropping bombs, like the new Top Gun. You have to learn how to do those pop-up maneuvers and drop the bomb right on the target. And so I really liked trying to master those skills. Mastering the piloting of the aircraft was just step one, and the means to becoming really great operationally at, again, achieving that impact with the aircraft. So that for me was really meaningful, a lot of fun. And, your office is a cockpit at 25,000 feet on a great crisp blue day, where you can see everything. I definitely miss that a lot. I miss that going to work every day and being able to do that. But I'm also grateful that I was able to do it for at least a little while.
Do you still fly at all even now or no? Do you still have your pilot's license or are you done with all that?
No, I used to, and even when I lived in DC, just for fun, and like an extra, some beer money or restaurant money would go and teach people how to fly little Cessnas on the weekends as an instructor. And then, after I got kids, I just stopped doing that because I didn't have as much time. I definitely want to get back to it, and I'd love to be able to teach my kids how to fly someday. So, but I've set it down for a few years just while my kids are little.
Well, yeah, you want to, there's that will, speaking of flying, that flies by, my friend. So enjoy that. All the cliches they say about having young kids, it is true. You're going to blink and they're going to be in their 20s and 30s and you're going to realize, holy cow, when was the last time I got to, coach, 6U soccer or, take them here or there or complain about how their clothes are in my way or I'm tripping over dance shoes, whatever it is. I mean, enjoy it because it is brief and fleeting. So we talked before we went on air about your family, and that's the important stuff. And I know you're a guy that prioritizes the right kind of stuff. So I know you're enjoying it as well. As we wrap up, I've just been like, it's an audio podcast, but I've been really wide eyed listening to all the things you talk about, because it is so, it is our reality in 2024. A lot of the stuff that 5 years ago people wouldn't have been talking about, all these, these crazy cybersecurity issues that are out there. And the scary part of it is they're going to keep coming, but thankfully, folks like you are out there trying to stay one step ahead of the bad guys and keep everybody's money and information systems safe and secure. So, thanks so much for, number one, giving us the time, but also just sharing, your story about all the stuff that you're doing. And really, I don't know how much you get to talk about it, because, you have a day job and you have to do things, but wow. I mean, if you ever thought about writing a book, buddy, you should definitely, I know you have to change some of the names to protect the innocent and guilty, but yeah, jot down some of that stuff, because that's been a wild ride. And I know you're not even done. You have a long career ahead of you, but man, you've been really in the front row to some really cool stuff.
Yeah. Hey, right place, right time, or right place, wrong time. I don't know, but it's been fascinating. It's been a great ride. And listen, so fun to connect with you, to talk about it, and really appreciate the lens through which you're asking these questions. It's been, it's made for a really meaningful discussion. So yeah, I'm really grateful to get to do it.
No, and another thing, just to kind of pull full circle on some of the things we talk about on podcasts, you're yet another guest who is at a place in their career that really isn't where they started. I'm so many people that we speak to here, who are successful, were initially going to do something completely different, whether it's people who change their majors or change job 3 or 4 times or move, into a different country, whatever it is. And that's where I kind of chuckle to myself so much at school, because, in school, we really try to help kids become prepared for the world outside of high school, whatever that's going to be, whether it's the military or a job or college or anything anymore. And it's really just a foundation, because you learn so much more by doing things and by, figuring out, well, I'm trying this, but it's not really what I want to do. So I have to pivot and go here. So ultimately, I've learned that school isn't really about the content, but it's just about, as I learned at Delaware Valley so many years ago, the mission statement of creating lifelong learners or educating on life's journey. I can't remember exactly the wording of the DV, mission, but that's really what it is. As much as all of our teachers are experts in content area, and we're really, the newspapers hold people accountable for their PSSA scores and all of that. I get it, but everybody needs to keep learning different skills and, putting new tools in their toolboxes on their own individual journeys. And you're just another guy that says the same thing, because it wasn't really what all you wanted to do was fly planes. I don't think as a 17-year-old, or never mind, as a 22-year-old, if you thought you'd ever be doing what you're doing right now. So again, thank you for bringing that, because it's just one more, piece that makes anybody out there who's questioning what they're doing think that's okay. It's all right to question and pivot, because it seems like everyone's doing that.
Yeah, I think that's so true. I always think about that Mark Twain quote. I never want to let my schooling get in the way of my education.
Yeah.
I think we go along and, you try to learn and hopefully absorb those lessons, and in the process, build your toolkit that, allows you to go and solve new kinds of problems over time. And I think that's growth, right? We all aspire to that, hopefully, and hopefully if we're lucky enough, we get to experience it. But yeah, I think it does start with that foundation. And again, I think I was fortunate in that I happened to be, again, maybe at the right place at the right time, and had some, a great education foundation as a launch point. I do believe that was a unique element of what we had there.
Yeah, definitely. And please, let mom and dad know that I was asking for them. Hopefully they're listeners at home. Not sure if they are, but, they were really mentors for me, as a young teacher. They gave me a first shot at a job. Hopefully I made them proud of my teaching days. And then as I went up through the ranks of administration, I'd constantly, call or text them about different things and ask them for advice on my career. So they're in the phone. And every now and then your father would give me some type of rash of what, because the Phillies were losing and the Yankees were winning. So we have that going on as well.
Yeah, that sounds familiar.
He does. Yeah, never one to shy away from busting stones. I'm sure the good doctor is still the same. But no, it's been great. It's been great catching up, and this will not be the last time you're on. We will be catching up to you in the future, because I'm going to probably be expanding and moving to a different platform in the next year. So we'd like to bring you back on in 2025 and hear what's going on. So again, Chris Finan, who is a cybersecurity expert, a DV alum, one of the people out there on the forefront trying to protect all of us, to keep our money safe and our information safe from the bad guys out there. So we appreciate you, Mr. Finan. Thank you so much. Is there any parting words you have for anyone as we leave?
I'd say, anybody can be a leader. Doesn't matter what your title is. Doesn't matter where you sit in the organization. Anybody can lead people. Anybody can be the person to go out and try to solve the problem for the first time. That's kind of the mantra that I've led my life by, and hopefully inspired some others along the way to do the same. But I think if we all do a little bit more of that, then we're going to make our society better, stronger, more resilient, and ultimately improve the human race all around. So that's I don't know, that's it. It's been a real pleasure to get to chat with you, Coach. It's been fun to catch up, and I look forward to doing it again.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And again, Chris Finan has been a